Hey family, how you doing? This is your brother Vimir. D's peace to you, peace to your home, peace to your family, peace to your community, peace to your ancestry, peace to my community, peace to my ancestry, and peace to the nation that you are and they are building. Peace also to the goddic forces, the great spirit above, the mother below. This is Mtima Radi, everybody. I gotta tell you, I had already recorded a video yesterday morning, and I was going to post it. But the ancestors told me to hold off, and I discovered why. This one's a bit more important, I suppose. I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of topics, but I'm going to start with Jacob Blake. First and foremost, you got to understand there is definitely a metaphysical element to it. Look at where they shot him. Look at where they shot him. If you are a studier of Bobby Hemmett, you may recall that Bobby Hemmett, for some time, talked about that part of the body and talked about the spirit being, or the soul particle being in that region. It was a spiritual hit in a physical body. Check his name. Check his name. That's all I'm going to let you guys do that research. Check his name. Not the person, the name, the energy. What is it saying? I'll let you do that research. There's a message about George Floyd, which the ancestors tried showing me back in June, but I wasn't interpreting it correctly. Maybe I didn't want to accept it because I didn't get it, but now I have interpreted it, and I could definitely speak to you about it. I have spoken to you for a number of years about the 4 strands of humanity. Mankind, man, humankind, human. I've told you that among every single race, those are colors, by the way, but it's deeper than that, but I'll get back to that. Not today, but among every single race, these 4 strands exist. Now, some rays contain more of the strands than others. For instance, because of their lower vibrational frequency and their orchestrated, their deliberately orchestrated desire to rid themselves of strands not fitting this profile, Europeans predominantly contain a lot of man and mankind strands. Didn't have to be that way. They chose it. China, the Chinese, particularly the ones that get most of the attention, the lighter skinned ones, again, a lot of man and mankind. They've chose that though. Japan is the opposite. Japan contains a lot of, well, they do contain a lot of man and mankind, but they border. They got a lot of man and humankind. And then in a lot of their traditional temples that are still ran by the ancient bloodlines, it's very few of them, by the way, you could find humankind human that could really trace their lineages back. Native Americans, the older Native American tribes, they have a lot of humankind and human, especially your indigenous groups down in South America and some in Africa. So when we went through the enslavement process, the goal was to separate us from our human kindness and our humanness. That was the goal. They literally beat, when they It's weird. When they say we beat the hell out of you, no. They beat the hell into us. They beat the heaven out of us. They beat the human out of us. They were knocking us down the lineal line. They wanted to move us from mostly humankind, human, and then even a fifth kind, which is higher. Martin Luther King represents that. Malcolm X represents that. They wanted to move us from those two areas. They wanted to move us down. They realized that they were not able to do that so successfully with indigenous people on the continent, not necessarily in the Caribbean, even though they killed a whole bunch of them before they could find out. But it was the same thing in the Caribbean. They realized they couldn't do it in the Caribbean. They realized they couldn't do it to the indigenous people on this land because they were connected to the earth, where water. So they annihilated them. They annihilated them. They thought about doing it to us, but they couldn't get rid of us. Back to George Floyd, though. George Floyd, again, wasn't interpreting this right. Didn't maybe want to accept it. George Floyd, along those strands, was a mankind transitioning to a man. Now, if you remember, I told you before, mankind has no soul. Man, you're looking at a soul kernel from 1 to 30%. Humankind, you're looking at 31 to 60%. Human, you're looking at 61 to 100%. Once you start going above that 100, that's when you get into that fifth area, that cosmic star child area. A lot of people have star energy, but most of them don't work on that cosmic star child, that actual cosmic star. It's very rare. Michael Jackson was a cosmic star, was a star child. Anyway, so George Floyd, he fit that mankind. Now, it's rare. And by rare, I mean, if you have 100 million, a billion, let's say a billion, mankinds, which easily, in a generation, you can easily get a billion mankinds, some of which don't live to be that old. But, out of a billion, you may get 10 million that when they're on the planet, that they actually get that soul kernel. Most of them, they start earning the energies while they're here, but they don't actually get the soul kernel till they leave. But even then, you're talking 10% and less. Actually, the numbers they give me is like 5 to 10%, depending on the era. George Floyd had not only earned his kernel while he was in life, but he had built his kernel to such an extent that he was in danger of going over the limit that man is allowed to have. What would that mean? It's not usual for a being to grow spiritually enough to go from mankind to humankind in one lifetime. It happens, but it is incredibly rare. And he was making moves to do it. Now, this has something to do with his daughter, who is a very special being. But it also has to do with his lineage. He comes from a special lineage. And that lineage goes back. So through his lineage, you could have some very powerful beings coming out. And there was a concern, cosmically, to an extent, that another being might have been on its way. And thus, he was sent back. Now, understand, there are good beings. And I know I don't want to, when they told me this earlier this morning, when they were prepping me for this, they were like, you're going to have to talk about this. And I know it's uncomfortable, but you're going to have to still talk about it. There are good beings and good energies that are wearing police badges. There are humankinds and humans who are in the police ranks. They've done their best to get rid of those folks. But there are a number of them in those ranks. None were on the scene when Mr. Floyd was killed. But Mr. Floyd, in many ways, was a sacrifice. Because he could have been protected. He could have been protected. But in many ways, he was a sacrifice. It was a ritual. Now, it was going to be someone. And there had to be a determination. Who was it going to be? Because the energies that are responsible for a lot of what's happening right now, they're looking from an ethereal standpoint at lights coming on. That's what they're seeing. Lights coming on. Souls lighting. Souls that were supposed to be darkened. Souls that were not supposed to be connected to the great beyond anymore. These people have been working overtime to ensure that these souls can't reach home anymore. And these souls are lighting up. And the goal is to sever as many of those cords as possible in order to stop one soul from lighting another soul, from lighting another soul, from lighting another soul, and thus lighting a community. They were going to hit somebody. George Floyd's mother who had a role to play in protecting her son up to that point, volunteered him. She told him shortly before it was going to happen. Couple of moments, not even a couple of days. They were telling me about this. They were like, no, she literally came to him in a very, there was an off moment where he was just, it almost looked like he was disconnected from reality. And that's when his mother was whispering in his ears. And that's why when he called out to his mother, he saw her. Because she was telling him, it'll be okay, baby, let's go. It's fine. Everyone's going to be okay. Let's go. There's a spiritual war brewing, ladies and gentlemen. There's a spiritual war brewing. And you didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming. But I'll tell you who possibly might have. Bobby Hemmett. Phil Valentine. I can't get into it now, but I will in the future. There's a book that I'm reading right now, and it goes it goes into traditionalism. And either Phil Valentine, Dr. Phil Valentine, and Bobby Hemmett have been studying traditionalism, or the ancestors have just led them through it, through the books that are connected to it, because Blavatsky is connected to it. There's a bunch of folks that are connected to it, but Blavatsky is one of them. A lot of your German occultist philosophers, not all of them, but many of them. I haven't seen Steiner, by the way, connected to it yet, but it's still early in the book. But a lot of them are connected to it. The Aryan stuff that I've talked to you guys about before is connected to it. That Bobby Hemmett has talked to you about before. The whole idea of the Vril. All of that is connected to this traditionalist concept. And they've made a lot of major moves in the last decade to take this country and this world in a very destructive direction. A very destructive direction. I would encourage you to research Steve Bannon, Bannon, Steve Bannon, who used to work at the White House. He was Trump's chief strategist. I would encourage you to research that man. Contrary to many of the published accounts of the man, he's not a stupid man. And while I may not subscribe to a lot of the crap he does or says, he is definitely someone who you'd want to look up. For that, just for that reason, for that whole traditionalist reason, man, if Bobby Hemmett and Phil Valentine, Dr. Phil Valentine, hasn't been studying that traditionalism, they're powerful. Because traditionalism is going to play a huge role. It appears anyway. It's playing a huge role in politics right now, and it's likely to play a huge role in politics and culture over the next decade. Most of your white New Agers, in some form or another, are exposed to traditionalist concepts. It's very, 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 very reliant on the idea of white gods. And when they're not relying on white gods, they're relying on gods who are said to be ancestrally connected to white people. Aryan gods who are connected to India and the subcontinent and Hinduism and the like. It's going to play a huge role in our politics and culture going forward. Give me 1 second. All right, family, so I'm back. A question that the ancestors have is, are we really ready to lead? Black folks, I mean. Are we ready to lead? That's the question. You see, because most of us are ready to complain. Most of us are ready to demand justice, even though we don't define what justice is. Most of us are ready to demand equality, although we have not questioned what the standards of white society are, and whether or not we actually want to be equal with those standards. Most of us are prepared to demand that we be treated as full citizens without questioning what does citizenry really mean for white people and in white society, and whether or not we want to fit into that dynamic. In other words, sorry about that, family. Many of us are ready to say a lot of things without actually formulating a thought process to analyze whether or not what we say matches what we need. Not want, but need. So many of us have really believed, we've been conned into believing that what we want is what we need, and that what we want is based on a real analysis of our internal processes. That we believe that what we want is what we need, and that what we want is really what we want. The fact of the matter is, what the world needs is for us to start leading again. Yes, it is true. We have been beaten up and we have been victimized by white people. We have been. We have been. But I disagree with anyone who says that we need to continuously say that we are victims of white supremacy. I get it and I understand it. But here's the problem. In the 1960s, saying that we were victims of white supremacy gave us mentally a way to define what was happening to us at the moment in time. And it didn't really cripple us, because then we made a choice at that moment to, okay, we're going to fight racism and we are going to move forward towards a time period where we can stop it from or we can scale back the amount of victimization that we experience. Maybe even cease it from happening. Today, to say I am a victim of racism, white supremacy, serves momentarily as a descriptive. But then, because of how our minds have been warped over these past 30, 40 years, it cripples us because we see victims as weak. To say I have been victimized and I continue to be victimized is to not only acknowledge the damage that is being caused by racism, but also to accept it and to own it. At the same time, it doesn't diminish our power. It doesn't diminish our power. Here's what's amazing. Republicans and conservatives clearly in the 1970s studied Francis Cress Welsing's work. You know how I know? Because in the 1980s, the Republicans started talking about black people having a victimization mind state, a victim's mindset. They started talking about it, and by the early 1990s, which is they might have only studied Francis Cress Welsing in the 80s. Who knows? But by the early and mid 90s, they were talking about the Democrats imposing onto black people a victim mind, a mind state of victimhood. And that has become part of their rhetoric. Now, whether you believe that's what the Democrats are doing or not, I'm not here to argue that. What I'm here to say is, because of how this society works, we equate victims with powerlessness. Because of how this society works, we equate victims with powerlessness. We do not see a bridge between power and victims. But to say, I have been victimized by racism and racists creates a power bridge, creates a bridge to power, should I say. Because, yes, we're acknowledging that, yes, in the past, I was definitely victimized. In the future, we are accepting that we are continued to be victimized. But the choice of what to do with what has happened to us rests with us. That's the bridge to power. Yes, I have been victimized by racism in the past. I am still victimized today. But I'm choosing what I'm going to do about that. Once we get to a point where we realize we are victimized in the past, present, but we have the choice on what to do with it, suddenly power is within our grasp. We are there. We are reaching for power. That is innate. That is within us. See, one of the great things that happened, Francis Cress Welsing, she had reached as far as she could go before she passed. She had taught us what we needed to be taught in order to survive what we may be going through rather soon. She saw on the horizon this guy, Donald Trump, who's in the White House, and called his presidency when everyone else was saying he wasn't even polling. She said, meet the new president. And she saw in that man a Hitler-like personality. She saw in that man a time period when black people will have to make a choice on who we are going to be. Yes. We were victims of the system. The question is or was at the time, would we be victims anymore? Well, her system must evolve now. Because the language which worked in the 60s does not work today. We are victimized by racism. Yes, in the past. And I acknowledge that I'm still victimized today. However, what I do about that is up to me. It ain't about allies. Because I'll be quick about this one, but white people show you what allyship means to them. They ain't even good allies with one another. You need comrades, you need solidaires. Now, I know for some black folks, that's a step too far. Oh, why do you even want to look for anyone outside of black people? Because every single rays has the 4 strands. You will be sold out as black people by other black people. Just as much as you will be saved by some white people. Are we really ready to lead? I wish we were, but I don't believe we're there yet. Do I think we're getting there? Yes. Do I believe we will get there? Yes. When? Don't know. I will say, though, part of the process will entail us learning about martial arts, learning about the togetherness of our people. We will have to start seeing ourselves as one again. When I was moving, it was sad, man. I was so disappointed. I had a map of Africa, and it ripped. It ripped beyond repair, so I had to throw it out. But I want to get another one. And every black person needs that in their home. They need it in their home. Because in our minds, if we don't constantly remind ourselves where we came from, we will not remember. You know why? Because every moment of every day, this hell which we live in this country, on this continent, reminds us who we need to be to survive in their world. And who we need to be is destructive to who we are. They eat your soul. They eat your soul and tell you that it's normal. They aim for your mind to destroy it and tell you that you should be submissive while they do it. They burrow into your heart to take advantage of those who you know, to manipulate you so you become a zombie for their possessor, and then say that that is a way to salvation for you. You need a constant reminder that the lies that they give you are lies. Not only do you need, and I know I don't have it up anymore, I missed that too, I'm going to have to get it up. Not only do you need the map, but you need the flags. I didn't do my genealogy. I remember my father telling me about where our family came from. My father was Creole. And he was very adamant about what Creole is. Creole is not what the French tell you it is. The Creoles that you see are light-skinned. My father was dark-skinned. He was darker than me. Like this shirt may be one tinge off of how dark my father was. He was from down south. He was very dark. My father was red-boned, dark, deep clay red, and you could see it in his face. The original Creoles had red bone from this soil, African blood from the slaves that had been imported, and this is key. This is key. They contained blood from the Caribbean indigenous people. Because when Columbus was going and slaughtering a bunch of people and enslaving people, many, many, many people got on boats and came to the mainland. That's part of the history that you don't learn. And they intermarried and had children with the coastal nations because they were all friends anyway. And then when the slaves came, especially when some of them started escaping down there, they intermarried and had children. And those were the original Creoles. They weren't called Creoles back then, but then they began to be known as Creole. And Creole is a indigenous word. It's not spelled how the French ended up spelling it. It was spelled some way different. When the French intermarried, because the indigenous people mistakenly thought these were friendly folk, and they started having children, they would call those Creole. But my father and his father, my grandfather, were adamant that the lighter skins were not Creole, they were mulatto. They were not Creole. So he was very adamant about that. Now, his lineage went to Jamaica. It was believed that the indigenous people who had came over and intermarried with the other indigenous folks on this land, which then intermarried and had children with the Africans, that they came from Jamaica, or what is present day Jamaica. So my father was very proud of that lineage, and indeed had family that he had met from Jamaica. It's important that you find that out. My family also has connections, African-wise, to the Pygmies and to the Congo. So, I have flags for all of those folks, for all of those countries. And to have that information, to have those flags up around you, man, that energy, to look up and to go, that is where my ancestors came from. That's where my blood is drawn from. That's where my energies come from. It changes your spirit. It changes your soul. It changes your mind. It changes you. And every day, I remember I remember having all of that up in my old apartment. And I remember coming home, and one of the first things I saw when I turned around, as soon as I came in the door, dropped all my stuff, and came around the corner, the first thing I saw was the African picture and my 3 flags. Now, I also had the Haitian flag up there, too, because, well, you got to celebrate the independence of Haiti. So that ended up being number 4. But when I saw that, and I didn't have Angola up there. I didn't get Angola till later. I don't even think I ended up putting that up. Anyway. When I saw it, it grounded me immediately. Because that's me. That's me. I had the red, black, and green up there. That is me. And I encourage you to do that. And then when I started collecting African books, especially about other tribes and about tribal customs and African spirituality, my body and soul were pulled so tightly towards that I couldn't escape. It was just powerful. And I encourage you to do that. The same thing with Native American stuff. And now I have some books on martial arts. But what is it? The one is on Qigong, and I have another book on something else that I can't remember right now because I just got it in. I found it completely by accident. Give me 1 second, family. All right. So, 1 second. All right. So I wanted to make sure I had this correct. Another thing that happens when you find out where you come from, in Africa, and you could use genetic testing. I'm leery about genetic testing for a couple of reasons. I won't get into them here. I will say that when you work with the ancestors, they tend to give you clearer answers. And especially if you're very empathetic to other people, your intuition's high. So if you have a strong connection to the ancestors, you can actually ask them to show you what part of Africa your lineage comes from and follow that. I'll give you a very quick and easy meditation. Something that anybody can do. Anyone. So you want to sit down. You know, you want to take in your breaths. You can take as long as you want to center yourself, to focus yourself, to really quiet everything out. You want to be somewhere absolutely quiet. You do not want to get disturbed in this, okay? If you want to have your drums going or whatever, be my guest. It doesn't matter. Make your connection to the ancestors. I don't know how you do it. People do it different ways. You're going to then circle in your mind about 7 to 10 times the idea that you want to find out where your African lineage comes from. Where your African lineage comes from. And then you're going to bring up in your mind a picture of Africa. You can use a regular picture of Africa, meaning just no lines, just the continent, or you can use a more modern picture of Africa, whichever one you want to do. And then you're going to have your ancestors color in the region where the tribe that your lineage comes from, where the region is. Then once you see that region appear, you're going to remember it, bring yourself back out, and you're going to go and you're going to research the tribes that exist in that region. And then start to research information about those tribes. Now, sometimes, and this happened to me, sometimes when you get information about where your tribe is in Africa, like the region, do not be surprised if the map shifts to India, to Japan, to China, to Russia, to Britain, it'll always start in Africa. At least it should. Maybe it won't. But don't be surprised if it shifts to the Pacific Islands, to the Caribbean, to South America, and colors in somewhere. Because we are such a hodgepodge of stuff that, yes, we may have African ancestry that's important, and we may have South American ancestry that's important. We may have Caribbean ancestry that's important, and we may have Russian ancestry that's important. It's going to get in there, trust me. So, that's something easy you can do to find out where your lineage is from without having to go through the DNA test. It is kind of funny. I sometimes wonder how many of these people who are getting shot have done the genetic testing. Speaking of genetic testing, an older friend of mine, I can't remember if I told you guys this, a much older friend of mine who has a son who is a homosexual, this black woman, her and I were talking one night, and she said to me, we were talking, I forgot what we were talking about, but she says to me, she goes, you can't fool nature. Or no, how did she say it? You shouldn't mess with nature. You shouldn't mess with nature. And I'm like, okay. And we got on the topic of her son. She goes, take my son, for instance. I wanted a son. I wanted a baby. So we did in vitro fertilization. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, I believe that a lot of his issues come from the fact that we played with nature. We made him when we shouldn't have. And I was like, I was kind of leery about it. And she goes, you can't tell me anything on that. She's like, I grew up with him. There's something that's missing from him. And I stopped for a minute because I was kind of shocked. I'm like, this is your baby. I mean, he's older, But I'm like, this is your baby. How are you? And she's like, I don't love him less. I'm just telling you right now, there's something different about him. And it's because we played God with making him. And she goes, I bet you if you check with a lot of these test tube babies, her words, not mine, I bet you'll see that there's something strange with all of them. I bet you'd see that. And I'm like, man, really? And she goes, yeah, I find myself wondering sometimes. And again, this woman is in her 60s telling me this, black woman. She goes, I find myself wondering sometimes, if, like how many of these things that are happening in this country might be because so many test tube babies are born when they shouldn't have been. Sometimes you just need to leave nature well enough alone. If you're not meant to have a baby, maybe you need to just leave that alone. I don't know why the ancestors wanted me to tell y'all that, but they wanted me to tell you that, so there you go. I did have a few books that I wanted to go through, but I'm going to wait with those till another day. Yeah, I think I'll end this here. Give me a minute. Let me see what they got to say on this. I'm back. There is somebody who's going to be listening to this video, and it is your job to write a metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. A metaphysical interpretation of the Bible for black people. Literally, like this is a multiple volume type of work that will bring you a lot of prestige in the future. But you have to understand that once you start working on it, you can't stop. It's going to be like a 10 to 12 to 15 year, long project. But you need to do it. And whoever it is, I think this has to be a guy. You will meet like 3 or 4, maybe 5 people along the way that'll help you with it, that'll really help you with it, that'll help you craft it and get it done. But, I mean, this work will be one of the great defining works of an era. Like, you are supposed to bring together, Quranic information, Egyptian information, Hindu information, Native American information, indigenous African information, voodoo. You are supposed to pull together, and you have the money for it. Like, if you don't now, you will. But you're supposed to pull together such a list of, I'm going to just call them what I typically call them, references and resources, that when you are done and when these books come out, and by the way, keep it under wraps. But when these books come out, they will be hailed as a complete and utter redefinition of what Christianity should be and must be. Get your hands on as many older, I'm talking 12th century, 14th century, 13th century, way back. Get your hands, you may be spending $800, $900, $1,000 on these things, but get your hands on as many of those older, Bibles that you can. And get all that put together, because it's going to be magnificent. Finally, to those of you who are wondering when I'm going to get the Bobby Hemmett list done, it's coming. It's coming. I'll probably break it up into 2 or more editions. Usually what happens is, like, I'll go through and I'll add 20 books. from his list, or maybe even 30 or 40 books from his list, which I have another like 100 or so to go. And then I'll find like 30, 40, 50, 60 other books, and so I'll probably end up doing that. So I'm hoping sometime in the next couple of months to do the first edition, and then by the end of the year I'll have all of the new lists done. So just be patient. Just be patient. Questions, comments, concerns, leave them below. I probably left some stuff out, but we'll definitely be talking again. I'm your brother Vladimir Dees. Peace.